you think you lost your love? Well, I saw her yesterday. It's you she's thinking of. And she told me what to say. She says she loves you, and you know that can't be bad. She loves you, and you know you should be glad. She Loves You, yeah, yeah, yeah. Possibly the song that introduced me to the Beatles, because there's this great clip from the Muppet Show of a band of literal Beatles singing that song. Unfortunately, it's not on any of the Beatles albums, because the Beatles, in their early days were thinking more in terms of singles and then in terms of albums. I also learned this idea from the channel David Bennett recently, that even later in their career, the Beatles were hesitant to put singles on the albums because they thought they were cheating their fans. I guess I view things a little differently, because I view a single song alone as not quite art. I feel like art comes from putting together songs and creating this collective moment and texture from different songs. I think a song alone is a little small to be art, but anyway, one of my resolutions for this year was to listen to every single Beatles album, because before that I'd really only listened to the Beatles through mixtapes, greatest hits collections, popular media, etc. And now I've taken the time to listen to all the albums, and now I'm gonna rank them, starting with number 12. The long and winding road that leads to your door has left a pool of tears. I've seen that road before. Don't leave me standing here. Lead me to your door. So, haven't yet seen the Peter Jackson documentary, but Let It Be, perhaps unsurprisingly, is the bottom album on my list, quite simply because it's an incomplete album. So I didn't know this before I listened to it, but a lot of it was recorded live to give kind of a documentary feel. So you get lots of tracks that might in theory be quite beautiful, like Two of Us and this demo-y version of Across the Universe, where they're just kind of underproduced, so you don't get the full effect. The voices kind of blur with the guitar too much. That said, Let It Be is an absolute stunner. Long and Winding Road, a pretty good stunner, especially if you don't mind the Phil Spector editions. I know that Paul McCartney really did, but the way I see it is that's just because he didn't like a major addition to his song where he wasn't the writer, I think, to a listener. It's perfectly fine. And then I Me Mine, other than I find the chorus a little weird, also a pretty smooth song to listen to. Close your eyes and I'll kiss you. Tomorrow I'll miss you. Remember, I'll always be true. And then while I'm away, I'll ride home every day, and I'll send all my loving to you. So number 11 on my list is With the Beatles. So with the four early Beatles albums, it's kind of a close call, to be honest. They're all pretty similar in quality, all of a bunch of covers, which means there's not quite as much to give them points as with the later albums. Also, they're just straightforward, beautiful, catchy pop songs. They don't do weird experimental things, which is also what gives the later albums a few more points. But With the Beatles, perfectly enjoyable album to listen to. Like, the only record on this list that I wouldn't quite call a good record is Let It Be. With the Beatles is a good record. That said, All My Lovin' is like the only real Beatles classic on there, at least of the originals. Perhaps Money counts as a classic, but that's not a Beatles original. That said, sometimes artists can have a really great performance with a cover, as we're going to get to later. I like the energy on Please Mr. Postman on this one, and It Won't Be Long Now is a great, energetic opener. I don't quite consider it one of the classic early Beatles tunes, I guess just because I hadn't heard it before, but it got me bopping and into this album. It happened once before, when you came to your door, no reply. They said it wasn't so, but I see you peep through your window. I saw the light, I saw the lights. I knew that you saw me, 'cause I looked up to see your face. So Beatles for Sale ranks for some amongst the weakest of the early Beatles albums. I think it's just because people were starting to get bored of that simpler sound by that point. I mean, it has one real Beatles A-list song in 8 Days a Week on it. Follow the Sun, I thought, was a beautiful singer-songwriter-y kind of composition from Paul. But what really got me hooked was that opening song of No Reply, because it's starting to sound just a tiny bit different from the other early Beatles songs, and that you hear a real awkwardness in John's voice, and it starts with an acoustic sound rather than, those big harmonies and electric guitar. So, I mean, they hadn't quite come up with their colorful, psychedelic, truly inventive and memorable ideas, but this album was the first one that sounded like it was trying to do something a little different, and I enjoyed listening to it. Also, a lot of people hate the cover song Mr. Moonlight. I just love John's opening vocal on that one, and the rest of the song is fine. So yeah, Beatles for Sale, solid album for me, number 10. As I write this letter, send my love to you. Remember that I'll always be in love with you. Treasure these few words till we're together. Keep my love forever. P.S. I love you. So I actually hadn't remembered that little bit at the end. Actually, Please, Please, Please Me was my first Beatles album reaction of them all, so I had to go back and review some of the songs. And, it has some catchy songs on that. I like the title song. I very much like the opener, and, well, the closer of Twist and Shout, well, that's, an iconic recording, and one might learn later in life that it wasn't a Beatles song originally. First it was the Isley Brothers, and I don't think the Beatles version is quite different enough from is it Isley Brothers or Isley Brothers? And I don't think the Beatles version is quite different enough for me to call that like a true Beatles classic, but it's such a great recording. How can it not be? John's voice at its screamiest. This record has a lot of covers. Some of them, the Carole King song, Chains, didn't do as much for me, neither did Boys. But, a generally good range of catchy sounds on here, including some more, movie-style theatrical stuff. Like, I think that's what appealed to me about P.S. I Love You in the end, even though the harmonies earlier on in the song are a bit messy. Anytime at all. Anytime at all. Anytime at all, all you gotta do is call and I'll be there. If you need somebody to love, just look into my eyes. I'll be there to make you feel alright. If you're feeling sorry and sad, I really sympathize. Don't be sad, just call me tonight. Anytime at all. Anytime at all. Anytime at all. All you gotta do is call and I'll be there. So, amongst all the early Beatles records, I have to give A Hard Day's Night the highest ranking, simply because it is pretty much, or is entirely, originals. The other thing that it has going for it is A Hard Day's Night, even if it's just that one line, it's a clever lyric. It's the Beatles going into wordplay. They're not just saying, hey, we can sing catchy songs about love. It's we can have a real concept to a song, we can really be quotable. And to a lesser extent, the same thing can be said of Can't Buy Me Love. And then, of course, I just love the energy of Anytime at All. The one weakness I think about this record is the last track isn't particularly memorable. Again, the Beatles perhaps aren't fully thinking in terms of an album at this point, so the idea of nailing the closer is perhaps not as important as it would be on the later records. But a lot of catchy stuff here. I also love the opening harmonica riff on I Should Have Known Better. The 50s nostalgia on Tell Me Why You Cry. I read the news today, oh boy, about a lucky man who made the grade. And though the news was rather sad, well, I just had to laugh. I saw the photograph. So, perhaps my first really controversial choice here, ranking Sgt. Pepper's at the bottom of the later Beatles albums, unless you count Let It Be. And I feel like this one just really gets its reputation from its cover art. And don't get me wrong, as someone who collects physical records and CDs, I love cover art. And when I come up with my albums, part of the vision is what is the illustration or photograph that brings the whole record together. I mean, that said, Sgt. Pepper's has a few really great songs on it. Lucy in the Sky, whether you believe it's about a child's drawing or about drugs, absolute classic. Same goes for Day in the Life. I like that it experiments with sewing different melodies together and brings in weird classical music effects at the end without actually being too long or too weird. It's still basically a catchy song with verses and a bridge to listen to if you just think of Paul's part as the bridge. Outside of that, When I'm 64, the strongest, catchiest, most punchy of Paul's granny songs, and Get By With a Little Help from My Friends, perfectly lovable, perfectly catchy tune. So you can make the case that this album has 4 A-list Beatles songs on it. The problem, the rest just doesn't do anything at all. So the run of Getting Better, Fixing a Hole, and She's Leaving, I completely forgot it immediately after listening to it. It felt like one of the least energetic, least memorable runs on a Beatles album I've ever heard, which doesn't mean they aren't fine ideas as songs. I think the ideas in Getting Better went on to shape some more interesting songs or more memorable songs in John's solo career. And then the concept of the girl running away from home is, of course, done better in David Bowie's Life on Mars. Lovely Rita, also not very memorable for me, even if the concept of Paul singing a cheeky love song to a meter maid could be good in theory. George does what he wants to do with his song Within You, Without You, but, if you're not particularly into, like, the alternative rhythms and sitar sound and his sort of repetitive spiritual message, it's just not going to be a particular favorite. Good Morning, not really a great song on its own. And similarly, the 2 Sgt. Pepper songs in Mr. Kite, I feel like they build up the concept of the record of this quirky, colorful band, but they're not lovely to listen to as individual songs. There's a kind of gratingness to them, which is intentional. It's part of the art, but it just doesn't make it as listenable an album as the other ones here. You tell me you've got everything you want, and your bird can sing, but you don't get me. You don't get me. When your prized possessions start to weigh you down, look in my direction. I'll be around. So next up on my list comes Revolver, and this is an album I was a bit of a latecomer to. I got this one as a gift when I was growing up, and the problem was the 2 opening tracks were ones I had ambiguous feelings about. So Taxman, undeniably catchy, but don't love it from a political perspective. The Beatles might have otherwise leaned left, but this song, Heard Alone, comes across as a bit libertarian and, against the idea that the wealthy should pay really high taxes because that's the best way to solve a lot of society's ills. And then Eleanor Rigby I now recognize as a wonderful Paul McCartney classic, but when I first heard it, I was grossed out by the metaphor of the face she keeps in the jar by the door because I couldn't help but hear that as literal. That said, I've made my peace with those 2 songs, and then there's plenty else to enjoy on this one. I love the energy of Gotta Get You Into My Life, though as I said on my Revolver video, I like the French recording a little better. Your Bird Can Sing is this excellent combination between early Beatles rock and folk singer-songwriter. Here, There, and Everywhere just brings out Paul with one of his more beautiful voices, and I think Paul does a fine job channeling the energy of the Loving Spoonful with Good Day Sunshine, even if it's not everyone's favorite Beatle tune. This album also has some psychedelic stuff, and I feel kind of the same about it as I felt about the concept tunes on Sgt. Pepper's. I mean, they make the album a work of art. They're interesting. I know some people really like She Said, and Tomorrow Never Knows. Again, I see them as interesting. I wouldn't single them out as favorite or memorable tunes. Have you seen the little piggies rolling in the dirt? And for all the little piggies, life is getting worse. Always having dirt to play around in. So this one comes from the White Album, and David Bennett made a video that sort of captures my feelings on this one. it has a lot of good stuff on here. While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Obla Di Obla Da, Blackbird, Back in the USSR, those are tracks that I'd really consider Beatles A-listers. And then Piggies, that song I just played, that's a quirky favorite. I had this friend back in middle school who, had challenges focusing in class and annoyed teachers, but one of the great ways he did this is he'd sing all these nonsense songs, some of which he wrote himself, some of which he learned from the internet. And before I was really listening to, any albums, let alone Beatles albums, he mentioned, there's this one Beatles album that's not like the others called the White Album. It has really weird songs on it, like Piggies and Revolution Number 9. And so I learned Piggies before I heard lots of the other songs on the Beatles' White Album. And while I think he might have oversold how weird the album was, that was sort of what got me excited about it. I'd say the only problem with the White Album is it's just too long, and if you think of an album as a coherent artistic experience and you don't just give points for every good song, well, it kind of overstays its welcome. Now, if you listen to the individual songs and try to decide what to be cut, it's a bit of a hard task because it's a matter, I think, of separating the great songs from the decent songs. Some people like to complain about Wild Honey Pie or Revolution Number 9. What I say with those ones is no, the most ridiculous songs, the songs that are totally unlistenable, those give the album personality. But, once you just get into sort of acoustic, not too interesting songs after you've heard a bunch of stunners, save them for another album. I guess maybe the Beatles were already sensing premonitions they were going to collapse and wanted to put out as much as possible. Nowhere, man, don't worry, take your time, don't hurry, leave it all till somebody else lends you a hand. Doesn't have a point of view, knows not where he's going to. Isn't he a bit like you and me? So next on my list, we're up to number 4 now. This is Rubber Soul. So this one might lack some of the real highlights of, say, a Sgt. Pepper's or a White Album or the Revolver, but I just think overall it has a nice consistency to it that makes me like the record as a whole better than some of those others. So this album I really appreciated listening to this year because it doesn't have a lot of those A-list Beatles tunes. I felt like I really got to discover things on it that I hadn't just heard through Beatles' greatest hits collections. So I like Paul's sort of end of relationship duo of You Can't See Me and I'm Looking Through You, because on the one hand, these are simple love songs kind of like the Beatles would write early in their career, but they're nice little psychedelic touches with organs and with backup singing that just make them a bit interesting and really catchy in their own way. It has In My Life, which again, perhaps also a little overplayed, but it's acoustic with just enough resonance on it to connect to a lot of people in that cheesy, nostalgic kind of way. I suppose Nowhere Man is kind of the A-lister on here, especially because I did listen to this record after watching the Yellow Submarine movie, and after watching that movie, Nowhere Man becomes a lot more uplifting. And there's a controversial closer, Run for Your Life, which John denounced later and can be unpleasant to listen to if you take the lyrics too literally. But if you're interested in that uncomfortable juxtaposition of, oh, it's just rock and roll song cliches with, is this real? And this just sounds like a folk song. It's just an interesting, slightly uncomfortable mishmash. And, slightly uncomfortable can make for a good artistic experience. I get high when I see you go by. My oh my, when you sigh, my inside just flies. Butterflies, why am I so shy when I'm around you? It's only love, that's all. Why should I feel the way I do? It's only love, that's all. But it's so hard loving you. So Help comes out right before Rubber Soul, and you could hear it as like the other side of the transition. So Rubber Soul being the first and least defined of the later Beatles albums, and Help being the last and most ambitious of the early Beatles albums. You could also just clump them together as kind of a middle period. What stands out about this record is the opening song, Help, which is a John Lennon song, and it's not the closer, but arguably should be Yesterday, which is a Paul song and went on to become the most covered Beatles tune of all time. And so I think hearing these two tunes, you start to see what I would say one of the big things that separates the later Beatles from the early Beatles is arguably the later Beatles aren't really a band. They're three singer-songwriters plus a drummer with some personality. Right, so it's not as necessarily even so sad that the Beatles break up, because by the time the Beatles break up, they really are just these three solo artists who should be able to make full LPs of all their original ideas and visions. And the individuality of the Beatles, of John and Paul as ambitious songwriters, not quite yet George, really starts to come out on Help. I really like that song, It's Only Love, even if the lyrics aren't that interesting per se, just because it's John developing this spacey sound that sort of leads into the next generation of songwriting, and of course you really hear that on Ticket to Ride. Ringo is a fun cover on this one, and Act Naturally, and there are some nice classic Beatles songs on here, like You're Gonna Lose That Girl, and I've Just Seen a Face, which is possibly the catchiest song the Beatles ever wrote. I'd like to be under the sea in an octopus's garden in the shade. He'd let us in, knows where we've been, in an octopus's garden near a cave. I'd ask my friends to come and see an octopus's garden with me. So, in talking about the White Album, I sort of engaged the debate. Do you see a great album as just getting points for however many great songs on it, or do you really need to experience the album itself, not the individual songs, as the art? What I like about Abbey Road is it kind of plays to two visions. So the real strength for me is some of the individual good to great songs. Open up with Come Together, and then you get to Something. You also have Maxwell's Silver Hammer on that side, and you have Octopus's Garden, Ringo's tune. Some people might see it as a little silly, some see it as a little childish, but, fan of Sea Animals here. That's possibly my favorite Beatles song. And then on the flip side, you get the Beatles doing what they did with A Day in the Life, but taking it to a whole other level, stringing together a bunch of songs as a melody. And on the one hand, none of those songs are as strong as John's part of A Day in the Life. None of them are really making observations about the world. I don't think they're pretty much just sort of silly little catchy ditties they came up with. But it does remain catchy throughout, and then it culminates with a song called The End, which gives you the quote, and in the end the love you take is equal to the love you make. It's just a perfect ending to the Beatles' career, even if technically they ended it with Let It Be. Sitting on a cornflake, waiting for the van to come. Corporation t-shirt, stupid bloody dirt shame, man, you been a naughty boy, you let your face grow long. I am the Eggman, they are the Eggmen. I am the walrus. Go. So I guess at the end of the day, for me, the more great songs you have on an album, the better it is. Though I do appreciate the ambition of the medley on the B-side of Abbey Road, but Magical Mystery Tour simply has so many wonderful tunes. So you have that Lewis Carroll energy in I Am the Walrus. Again, I like when you see contrasts between John and Paul's visions. So the contrast between their two Liverpool nostalgia songs, Penny Lane for Paul and Strawberry Fields Forever for John, is great. Hello Goodbye is incredibly simple, but it just makes perfect use of its instrumentation, and All You Need Is Love is an absolute earworm. Again, not one of the Beatles' most brilliant songs per se. They made it as a simple song that could be aired on TV, that could be understood around the world, but even the fact that it quotes the Marseillaise I like. And there are some more ambitious musical moments on this one for sure. The Fool on the Hill is a bit of an unconventional melody. Blue Jay Way, the weirdest song, probably the least easy to like on here. It's not nearly as weird as it seems by comparison. It still basically is a verse-chorus structure, and it's short enough that you can appreciate the interesting quality of the experimentation. Baby You're a Rich Man, not necessarily a favorite for mine, but a sort of a nice reflection on the hippie era and the question of, whether you can be a hippie and be wealthy, because a lot of the, hippie rock stars were getting quite wealthy. Your mother would know, nothing special about that one per se, but a nice way to fill out the album. So Magical Mystery Tour, just filled with so much flamboyance, and perhaps some people won't count it as an album because it was originally released as an EP in Britain. And again, it's because of this Beatles belief that you shouldn't resell singles as albums, and then reluctantly singles were added to this album, but it did create, the most perfect Beatles album from start to finish. So overall, had a great year listening to the Beatles, actually taking the time to listen to those albums, and I look forward to exploring more of rock history in the years to come, and sitting back and listening to the classics, those songs that my mother would know. Oh, my mother would know. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B.
She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah.